And good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. A little bit about the group. We meet once a month. Meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover any and all topics related to .NET. You can find meeting information for both past meetings as well as current and future meetings on meetup.com with the URL listed there at the bottom of the slide. I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, Tech Systems, Inedo, PostSharp, and DevExpress for sponsoring the prizes, and NIS Technologies for covering the web hosting. Couple general announcements. Please note that participation is always encouraged. The only stupid question is the one that is not asked, so always feel free to speak up and ask. Also, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones to avoid any background noise. And we want to keep it casual but organized. So at any point in time, if you have a comment, question, or care to chime in for whatever reason, feel free to jump in. But at the same time, we want to give our speaker enough time to cover through the demos and all the slides. Also, tonight's presentation will be recorded and will be posted on YouTube within approximately 48 hours after the presentation. Speaking of which, for tonight's feature presentation, we have Randy Pagels from Microsoft. He's going to be discussing Azure application development and tips and tricks. Randy is a Azure App Dev Specialist from Microsoft. He connects with customers to help them understand options in migrating to the cloud, how to improve their Azure development practices, and the business benefits behind moving to the cloud. He's also part of the Midwest Region Apps and Infrastructure Specialist team with Microsoft, and he works with customers to eliminate tech barriers. And tonight he's going to be discussing a few of those issues on how to get around tech barriers, some of the new features available in Azure, and application development. So with that, I will turn it over to Randy, and I will make you presenter.
Thank you, Sam. Well, thank you, Sam. Thank you for the intro. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. Take time out on your busy nights to join our user group meeting tonight. Fantastic. As Sam said, my name is Randy Pagels. I am based in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm going to do a quick intro on myself here. But what I wanted to talk about was the agenda here, and I probably have this a little bit out of whack. As Sam said, let me move that. My agenda, I planned on doing a couple things. So I wanted to kind of go through the state of app dev, what it looks like today to Microsoft in the world. And if any of you had the chance to attend the Microsoft Build conference, which was the end of May, great. If not, I want to just take a few minutes on a few slides to kind of bring the best of the best up to date, bubble it up, what was spoken about. In these sessions, by the way, like the build, everything we talked about, if you want to know more about that, you can email me or whatnot, or just go to the build conference, but you can watch all of those sessions. They're all online. And then I'm going to dip into some of the Azure App Services, which is a real common service in Azure for running a lot of different applications, a lot of different ways. I do, again, I have a soft spot for Visual Studio. I was a Visual Studio technical specialist for a while, so I want to talk about the next version of Visual Studio coming out, and also the direction of .NET and .NET Core, which is where we're headed. And of course, then the next step would be, let's talk about app modernization, migration. How do you get your apps, or any of your apps, how do you move those into Azure and a cloud platform? To do that, I like to talk about DevOps. Part of my role is DevOps. I'll do that proper introduction in just a second here. And then I usually get asked this by customers all the time is, how does Microsoft build software? How do we use DevOps to build software? So I thought, just for fun, I put that in as well. And infrastructure as code is a near and dear to my heart as well. And then we'll do some demos. So this isn't all slides, but think about it as half and half. I wanted to kind of mix and match it a little bit here. So again, I'm an app dev specialist, which means I am a resource for customers. I have a customer base. I work in enterprise commercial area out of Detroit, so I have the automotive customers. I have some customers over in Cleveland as well. Of course, we don't travel right now, but my job is to help them understand at least cloud technologies when it comes to app dev, migration, moving apps to Azure, how to automate those, toolings included, so Visual Studio, GitHub, pieces like that. So that's me right now. Before that, I was so looking at my 15 years at Microsoft here. I worked with the Azure engineering team in Redmond for almost 2 years and built what we call Fast Track for Azure. And basically that was an onboarding service for customers adopting Azure. So we would engage with engineering resources to make sure things were architected right and built right the first time, so customers didn't spin their wheels moving into Azure. So that was a fun experience. And prior to that, some of you may have known me from Visual Studio. I was a technical specialist with Microsoft for 10 years. And a couple fun things here. I enjoy kayaking. I live on a lake, so I have a kayak I can just throw in the water here. Those are the pictures from I've seen, took off my dock here. I love coffee, craft beer, and of course a Friends enthusiast. So, but enough about me. Let's move on. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. So these are some slides that I thought would resonate well with what the future is looking like. So we know it's been a hard year for everyone. This COVID, right? The idea is now is we've noticed accelerating innovation has been happening here, and customers they're on their own journey to the cloud now because we've seen a lot more of this traction because of COVID. Just everything's online, everything's remote, right? So we've seen a lot of different apps and different ways of building apps, and in a nutshell, that's what we've been seeing so far. We've also seen public cloud adoption. So as we're looking ahead past this, I'll call it post-pandemic. Sam and I were just talking about that. Hey, things are getting back to normal, let's hope. We're seeing massive improvements in application time to market. So these are shifts in remote development, productivity, public cloud adoption, happening more now than than ever before, funnily enough. And you may or may not have heard this term cloud native. So our vision is the app of the future is cloud native. And basically that means, hey, we're packaging code, dependencies and everything. Containerization is pretty popular. Serverless is pretty popular, microservices as well. And then of course you wrap that around DevOps and tooling. So this is quite the popular topic, is just cloud native itself. It's a big topic. We could have a whole session on that. Again, as I mentioned earlier, my goal here is to just kind of sprinkle in different things tonight. Hopefully something grabs your attention. We can either talk about it, IM or whatnot. The Build 2021 conference was at the end of May. It's 3 days of usually just app dev type conferences or app dev topics. There is some infrastructure in there as well, data and AI. What I'm going to cover just a few slides worth is what the developer edition looks like. So we had some pretty big strategic changes and we announced at the Build conference. Again, if you missed any of this, there's deep dive sessions. Happy to share. I have a link at the end. I'll share that as well. Okay. So hey, our best-in-class tools. This is talking about whether you're a professional, roll up your sleeves, hands-on developer slinging code, or whether you're I'll call it low code. They used to call this a citizen developer, lower right-hand corner here. And there's something for everybody. I talked to different customers on both ends of the spectrum here. But on the left-hand side, if you haven't used GitHub, GitHub is one of our, obviously Microsoft owns GitHub. The GitHub itself, the Visual Studio Code, of course, is free. And then Azure DevOps is darn near free. And putting those tools together to build your app services on top of a cloud and building your API layer as well. On the right-hand side is Power Automate. So those are more of Power Automate workflows. Power Apps are a great way to work, to build applications and tap into APIs to basically pull down information. So the idea with this was there's a whole spectrum going on here for depending on your depth of I guess knowledge on the app dev stack. So Azure itself, I know this is a .NET user group meeting. We talked about the cloud itself, so I'm going to be talking about Azure quite a bit here. Hopefully if you've played with it or anyone that has Visual Studio has played with it. But Azure provides this end-to-end developer platform. It's a broad range of services. It's enabling developers to build, deploy, and scale their apps even faster than ever. And there's a lot of services on the slide. Any of these can be, again, drill into deeper, but the idea is the tooling that we have, and these are some of the demos I want to show you, is the integration points we have with that. So, but the idea is allow developers to go ahead and modernize their apps and throw them into Azure, right? Kick them up into Azure. Another announcement we made at the Build conference was about Java apps. So if you have any experience or have a friend building Java apps, we did a lot. We made some investments in the Java world here, running Java apps on Azure. So we're offering a fully managed service. We call it Azure, the Spring Boot, for Spring Boot apps for Azure Spring Cloud. That's the first one. We also have our own Microsoft build. We build an open JDK. It's a free open source plugin, and it supports Azure or Java on the Azure stack. We also announced Red Hat JBoss EAP. So that's available on the virtual machines running in Azure as well. And then, of course, IBM WebSphere is the last one there, also available for migration to virtual machine scale sets. So those are some of the announcements. Again, there's sessions on these. I'm not going to go deep on any one of these things, but that's the idea. So this Java ecosystem, again, this is one of our core announcements. It's a very broad, across the different technologies for Java, for Spring Cloud, and different application servers and frameworks. So wherever you are in Java, Azure supports the workload and the processes for this, for whether it's a complete platform as a service support or infrastructure as a service support. And I just want to touch on this next slide. It's not meant to be an eye chart, but I do get questions on it. If you haven't dabbled in Azure at all, or even if you have, there's a lot here. And the whole point of the slide is just to look at this. If we have 54 plus data centers around the world, each of those have thousands of servers. Built on top of those servers is the infrastructure services at the bottom there. So think of it as compute, storage, and networking. And you can run virtual machines on those. But from an app dev standpoint, it just wouldn't make sense. Even though you can do it, doesn't mean you should do it. So on top of the infrastructure services is what we call platform services. And tonight I'm going to show you some of those platform services. One of our main services, which is the app service. But keep in mind, as I'm showing you these things, each of them have a pillar of security and different compliance that you can plug in and use. Each of those have different, like Active Directory is pretty popular as well. And then there's different components you can plug in for analytics, for data, data as a service. You'll see development services here as well, et cetera. So there's just a lot going on here, but I just wanted to point that out, that we're going to talk about this middle piece, this application platform piece. So now in preview, this is a new thing. Now in preview is you don't have to choose between the productivity of platform as a service and the control of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is running containers. We made an announcement now, these different services you see here, these are platform services, whether they're running in the cloud or whether they're running in anyone else's cloud or on-premise. These application services now run on what we call Azure Arc. They're Arc enabled. So Arc is a way, Arc allows you to deploy either whether web apps, functions, API management gateways, logic apps, containers, or event grids, etc. And it allows you to take advantage of the app services, which I'm going to show you tonight. So that's one of the announcements we made at the Build conference. And the benefits, if you just had the top 3 benefits of this application services, enabling your teams to accelerate continuous development and deployment of your apps. You can choose between the platform as a service on Azure. You could actually run it in a container on your own Kubernetes if you happen to have a Kubernetes cluster running around. So keep that in mind. And the way the magic happens is again, Azure Arc is the glue for these things. If you haven't seen some of these features of the application services, I'm going to show you a few things when I demo this, but staging slots and deployment slots are pretty popular. Automatic backup recovery, automatic load and balancing, scale up, scale down, testing and production, A/B testing, and pretty much take any app and run it, any language of your choice, pretty much will run quite well. And then containers are also, I'm seeing that a lot actually. So let's move on here. Another announcement we made was, hey, Microsoft is the #1 contributor to the open source. We have 30,000, there's like 30,000 engineers in Redmond, well, actually worldwide. and they're all associated with GitHub accounts. So if we have GitHub accounts, we contribute to 60,000 open source projects, which comes out to about 9.5 million components that are used. So our developers, our engineers in Redmond building the services and software, they use open source. And it's again, we're contributing to it. GitHub is a big place, a big source of some of our applications. I'll talk more about that in a minute here. And the open source we're talking about, it spans from operating systems to programming language to data to AI and even the web. One of those is one of these projects called Dapper. I don't know if anyone has heard of Dapper. Dapper is another, I'll talk about that in just a minute, but Dapper is something else that the team is working on as well. So with the increase of open source adoption, obviously we use open source so much, it's imperative that everything runs smoothly on Azure, right? Half of the cores on Azure, those tens of millions or thousands of servers, half of the cores are running Linux. So heavily invested in that. We have to make sure the performance, reliability, security, and resiliency is there. These are across the fully managed databases, the analytics, the machine learning services. So it's critical that these things continue to run well. PaaS vNext. So we talked about platform as a service ever so slightly. What we're working on now is called PaaS vNext. And PaaS vNext is that ability to use Azure Arc to run these different services and containers, different clouds, as well as in Azure, of course. So, and the important thing is that the same code, same tools, same management works seamlessly here. The PaaS vNext also includes what we call Dapper, and Dapper is that built-in event-driven architecture. So here's what Dapper looks like. It basically, if you think of Dapper for writing microservices, right? Microservices are very hard. They're very hard to build and to maintain. So Dapper is a completely open source distributed application runtime. So it enables developers to move applications from on-prem to the cloud with 0 changes. So Dapper provides the security and features and conforms to standards, help you follow best practices. So it allows you to write these microservices without actually writing a single line of code. And let me just show you an example what one it looks like here. So this is an example of a Java application. It's using the Microsoft build of the OpenJDK, and it's deployed to Azure Kubernetes Service using GitHub Actions down at the bottom here. And basically the application, it uses Dapper to retrieve tweets. It communicates and scores them to Azure Cognitive Services, which is an AI capability, and then stores them in Azure Storage, publishes them to the service bus, and this is all possible with just a lift and shift of the application and using simple HTTP requests. So everything inside that blue box is Dapper, and there's some bindings. There's a binding file that helps you with that. So if you have not heard of Dapper, it's a pretty cool technology. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, it's not so bad. Microsoft publishes this thing called the Book of News. If you wanted to know more, or maybe you weren't quite into that stuff, but there's some other things you wanted to learn more about, there's this, if you just go to news.microsoft.com, these will be in the slide deck I'll provide Sam at the end here. And then there's some developer edition roundup here. So again, we're going to talk more about .NET a little bit here, but .NET 6 previews was released. This .NET framework called MAUI has been released. Visual Studio 2019, 16.10 was available now. So, and again, the managing identity, Microsoft, the identity itself for hooking up apps, app services, make it a lot easier for identity configuring .NET Core apps. So again, I just took a few highlights here. The book's not that big, but anyway, I'll leave it in there for now. Let's switch gears a little bit, talk about Visual Studio. So for those that use Visual Studio, we announced 2022. 2022 will have a preview this summer. And yay, the good news is it's 64-bit now. So anyone running large projects will load much faster, allow you to easily, the performance is much faster, the load time is much I'll say, well, load time is much faster as well. So 64-bit, so I thought that was really cool. .NET 6 will be part of that as well. It's a unified framework. It's really, the one .NET to rule them all. There's always developer productivity features that are added for scale and performance. There's better, really tight integration with DevOps and GitHub. So hopefully your source code is ideally in one of those two places, and then the modern development tools, so like Blazor is another popular thing that's coming out, or that's out there already. And this is more just in case you didn't know this. If anybody wanted to get started with GitHub, there's this bundling idea. If you own Visual Studio per professional or enterprise, for a penny a month, you can have the GitHub. They call it an attach, so it's a Visual Studio and attached GitHub for a penny a month, basically. That allows you all the access to GitHub. Again, any of this information you want to know more about, you know how to get a hold of me, or Sam knows how to get a hold of me. Let's talk about the .NET itself. So .NET 5 will be the single unified platform for building applications that run on different platforms, so Windows and Linux, and different devices like IoT and mobile. So it really truly is your platform for building everything. .NET 5 is based on a .NET standard, so it means that not every .NET framework feature will be available, but most are. So why .NET 5? .NET 5, again, it can be deployed side by side. You can have multiple versions of the same .NET 5, different apps and different folders. They run independent from one another. That is cool. They'll run on Mac, they'll run on Windows, they'll run on Linux, it doesn't matter. They can run with or without containers. So when you're building a .NET 5 app, there's also an option to compile it down to an exe, so it's self-contained running. So if you haven't seen that before, that's cool. Something else that's fairly new, it's in preview right now, you can still play with it though. It's a command line .NET assistant. So to help you move into .NET or .NET 5 up to .NET 5 or .NET 5 Core, there's this .NET Upgrade Assistant. So it helps you modernize older .NET framework code bases. It's a command line tool. It gives you the step-by-step instructions for upgrading to the latest version of .NET. If it won't convert fully, it will give you a lot of help and pointers to tell you what you need to do to make it fix. So it analyzes all your NuGet packages, helps you understand all your dependencies. Again, recommendations for different fixes you might have, configuration. And it supports multiple project types. So whether it's ASP.NET or MVC apps, web form apps, WPF apps, it will help you with all that. So definitely want to give that a try if that's of interest to you. And then let's move on to the one that we call it the vision here, our vision of one.NET. And the idea with one.NET is a simplified platform and choices for .NET developers. So the idea here is to provide a single stack that supports the best of breed solutions. And it is the unification of .NET and provides a native cross-platform framework for building iOS, Android, macOS, Windows, etc. In a single code base. So if you've heard of Xamarin, Xamarin was the mono convert or port from the .NET framework, cross-platform. So this is the new, say, a replacement for Xamarin. It's, again, single code base. Write it once, run it everywhere. That's the idea with .NET 6. Again, .NET 6, there is a preview you can get in 2019 of Visual Studio today, but it's also coming out in the preview of 2022. Let's look at a couple of the main features here. So there's some big areas. .NET 6 has big areas of investment. One thing for sure is C# 10 will be included with .NET 6. And let's see what else there is on this slide that would be of interest. Blazor, of course, Blazor Desktop for form development. .NET 6 can enable you to build these cross-platform native mobile desktop apps. It also includes this, what we call .NET multi-platform, the app UI. Some call it they short call it MAUI. If you've heard of MAUI before, so I thought that was interesting tech. So .NET MAUI is the evolution of Xamarin Forms. Again, MAUI is built with .NET 6. It's going to be in Visual Studio 2022. It truly is this high-performance, cross-platform, native desktop and apps in a single code base. And that's the whole idea. The worlds collided or came together. I shouldn't say collided. They actually came together in .NET 6. So we just released preview 4 of Maui, so you can actually go out and play with it. And the idea, again, using Visual Studio to build this .NET Maui app. And let's see what else. So yeah, that's pretty much the highlights. I'll move on here. The other thing that's always interesting to, just to announce is there's the .NET Conf every year, so we announce the date for this. It's November 9th through 11th, so you can pencil that in. And basically, it's a one-day conference. It's all recorded from the product group that talks about and demos different areas of the .NET framework, .NET 6. This will be our .NET 6 launch, which is November. So mark your calendars for that, .NETconf.net. Let's look at some migration options. So application modernization. So this is where I spend a lot of time talking with customers as far as, that Azure has a deep support for common patterns for application modernization. So whether you lift and shift to a VM, which again isn't really utilizing the best out of your apps, it's not taking advantage of the cloud itself, but it does move the app there. And then you're transitioning your app into containers is another idea, modernizing it to containers, because once it's compiled in .NET Core, you can run it in a container, you can push it up into Azure. And then, of course, adopting databases. And then the DevOps tool chain at the bottom here, it supports all these different patterns to get this code up into the cloud, so keep that in mind. The journey is, let's look at 3 things. The lift and shift is rehosting. That's just as simple as taking your app that's running and throwing it into a VM, and it'll just run there almost without modification. Again, that's the easy way, but it's not really saving you money or optimizing, taking advantage of the cloud itself. In app modernization, there's this idea of refactoring, re-architecting, and rebuilding. And in the center, again, infrastructure is code lift and shift, but you can actually refactor it by moving it to containers. You can re-architect it by building on a platform as a service using serverless technologies as well, or just rebuild it from scratch, which will be called cloud native. Another evolving, we did touch on app service, but I thought it would be worth calling out again. I'm going to show you, I'll actually save this and I'll show this in the portal itself when I show you a demo. So these are some of the reasons customers use Azure App Service. It's turnkey. It's let Microsoft manage the infrastructure. You manage these knobs and switches we have here, for your best performance of the application itself. I already talked about this, the 3 different ways to get your code up there, so we won't beat that one. We do make some tools. There's 2 tools that I thought were pretty cool to call out. The App Service Migration Assistant. So if you have an application that's a website that's running out there, you can actually take this assistant, point to the URL, and it will come back and assess the site and determine what you need to do to the code to make it run in the Azure App Service. Usually it's not a whole lot, but it gives you a report at the end, which is nice. And then it helps you with that migration. Same goes for the database itself. So you can actually point it to the database. It will tell you what it needs to run or what you need to do or change or whatnot inside of Azure to make that database run. So there's 2 tools to help get started for a lot of different applications. I'd left this in just for additional detail, but we just talked about the Upgrade Assistant, again, for moving your .NET apps. So keep that in mind. Yeah. So let's just touch on DevOps itself. Again, one of the 4 or 5 things I do regularly is talk to customers about DevOps and adopting DevOps, not only the philosophy of DevOps, but the DevOps tooling itself. Of course, Microsoft makes an Azure DevOps tool that, we branded it that way or call it that. But I find with customers, and these reports are out there that talk about the state of DevOps, and customers using DevOps, big time faster to market with their code, big time increased revenue. And as they find bugs or defects, that time to recover is much faster. The time to incorporate features and changes is much faster. These are just some of the stats. And then failure rate, of course, because they're doing it so often, their confidence level goes up to be able to use CI/CD and deploy more often. The official definition of DevOps, again, if you're not using some of the DevOps philosophies, is this iterative, cyclical type of work. So your planning work, your building work, your developing work, your testing work, your monitoring, getting that feedback and pouring that back in, generally through some sort of tracking, like project management tracking board or whatnot. But this quote here says it all, that DevOps is a union of people, process, and products. And really the key in this whole sentence is value. If you're not delivering value back to your customer, then there's something you probably are not working on that you should probably be working on instead. Value is huge, just delivering value. So again, I kept this very high level, that just DevOps in a nutshell is this tooling that plugs into each other. So whether you're a project manager, whether you're managing code, I say Azure Pipelines is what it's called. It's the CI/CD pipeline system for creating build and deployments. It is the heart and soul of our DevOps tooling. And then there's a few other things that are here, a few other goodies, if you will. Mobile Development App Center, test plans, manual test case management, Azure Artifacts for storing binaries and versioning the binaries themselves, and then Key Vault for different type of keys, and usually database passwords and connection strings and things like that. And again, they are better together sometimes. Story depends on your situation. But GitHub itself also provides repos, has a fantastic security system for monitoring and scanning code at rest. We can talk more about that at some point if you like. And then they call them GitHub Actions, which is their CI/CD pipeline. So there are some parallels going on here, but there's also some uniqueness that doesn't exist. I like to call this out just an honorable mention, because I'm going to show this in one of my demos, is infrastructure as code. So I'm a big fan of infrastructure as code. And the idea here is set up your infrastructure and version control it alongside the application. As you deploy your applications, part of the CI/CD pipeline, have it deploy the infrastructure as code first. It doesn't matter if you're using ARM templates or Terraform or Bicep or whatever your tool is, but go ahead and deploy that. Stand up that infrastructure, make sure that infrastructure is in sync. It keeps it from drift. So there's setting drift or configuration drift. So I have some demos that I run this all the time. It just keeps everything in sync, if you will. Not to mention, if it crashes, things crash or whatnot, I can push a button and stand up the infrastructure as well. So I just wanted to mention that. I said I would talk about Microsoft so DevOps at Microsoft, what it looks like. Right, we have the concept about 4 or 5 years ago called One Engineering System. The One Engineering System is all about using our actual Azure DevOps product. So we build it for customers, but our CEO, mandated that all engineering teams use this. And so there's about 110,000 engineers. You can see some of our releases we do. So using Azure pipelines, the deployment pipelines, there's 157,000 deployments a day here. A lot of different work items, so tracking user story cards, requirements, etc. That happens a month, a million a month or so. The commits, so we're using Git, we're using GitHub, we're using different Git repos, but 4 million Git commits a month is pretty huge. And then 10 million builds per month. So what does that look like? Again, I always say at Microsoft, some of our main products, we have a master branch, if you're familiar with Git. So the idea there is that at a drop of a hat, we can deploy our full-blown, the systems customers rely on, deploy those from our master branch. And in order to achieve that, there's a lot of branch policies and security we apply. And the only way to get code in from a developer teams, these 110,000 engineers, is through pull requests. So we live and die by pull requests on code. GitHub has had this for a while. With our pull request, you'll see in the center here, here's the number of, this is actually an older screenshot. We run 78,000, actually right now it's about 95,000 unit tests with every pull request. So that's huge. We rely heavily on unit tests. And pull requests happen, whatever that number was, many times per day, per month. And that is the only way to get code in. There's There's approvals have to happen, builds have to happen, tests have to pass, etc. So, and then of course the trick here is deploying code out. This is all automation. So DevOps is a lot about automation. Automate as much as you can. Start with whatever hurts the most, and deploying to our 9 or actually 7 tiers of servers. They have this idea called the progressive exposure. So they start in ring 0 and they go through ring 6. And there's automated gates that happen here. This is a screenshot from our actual Azure DevOps pipelines. So as code is deployed to these different servers, there's either automated or manual approval process. There's called gates here. You'll see gates. And this is processing. So they actually, when a developer fixes a bug, checks a piece of code in for a feature, it goes through this whole automated process. And our ring 0 is Redmond. So all of the 45,000 engineers in Redmond get the first ring. It bakes for, let's say, 36, 48 hours or so, 2 or 3 days. And if all goes well, it moves to the next ring. You'll see at the bottom here, some of the rings are, I don't have it in the slide deck, but our rings will be, Redmond is the first one in North America, then I think South America, and then it goes over to Europe. So anyway, I just thought that was worth mentioning just to kind of give you an exposure to that. Some of the systems that we build, remember, it's all about delivering value. So for instance, our Azure networking team, they're putting in fiber, they're connecting data centers, they're putting in racks of servers. They don't have code, but they still use Azure DevOps to manage their work. So Visual Studio Code team, the Visual Studio team, Xbox Live team, the DevOps team, being Office, Minecraft, etc. They're all using Visual Studio. They're all using Azure DevOps for their code and deployments. I just thought that would be interesting. One team stands out, though. It's pretty big. The Windows team itself, the Windows 10 team. And as we all know, Windows 10 delivers on all sorts of different platforms here, different form factors. So and in order for Windows to have that set of software and experiences, right, that powers from a HoloLens, you see a HoloLens down there, Surface devices, the Xbox devices, etc. Remember that this team, I think it's 9,500 engineers build Windows 10. So let's just look at that real quick because I thought it was worth mentioning. When you think about all the code that exists, it's called one core. So one core code is common, runs across all the different form factors. So each form factor has a very specific edition code that runs the different customized experiences for that device. Each device, of course, needs separate drivers. And then on top of those, you have these different apps and services for different experiences that are happening there. So across all these different devices, all this different code, you think about that's a mammoth set of repos. And I just wanted to call that out. It's the largest, I think, it's the largest in a Git repo. So 500 gig of source code just for Windows 10 product across 6,000 repos. I thought that was worth mentioning. This is again how Microsoft is building Windows 10 today. Here's a couple numbers that I thought were worth mentioning as well. That's 367,000 commits, which is huge. The pull requests I talked about, right? Pull requests each running 95,000 unit tests. There's 33,000 pull requests that happen. So when you look at these numbers, 10 commits a minute, 1,100 pull requests a day. So it's a lot, right? So next we move into testing and validation. So these tests are all automated. They're done daily. And it's really about, hey, does the thing boot up? How's the battery life? Do the operations work? There's these tests that are deployed to these devices and tested and recorded. And there's a whole automated lab that takes care of this. This is the Windows 10 team. So anyway, I will pause for a minute. I'll come up for air a little bit here. See if there's any questions in the queue here. Anybody have questions? Again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. Otherwise, I'm going to move on and just start showing you a few things. All right, let's get out of this. I'm going to start with, hopefully this is big enough. If it's not, Sam, let me know. But I'm going to start with Visual Studio 2019, just a blank slate. Hopefully you can see that okay. And to show you the new experience here, if you haven't used Visual Studio, if you say new project, you'll notice the new project, create a new project template has changed a little bit. It's been updated with these templates. And what's nice about this is I can go over here and maybe I'm building something for a specific language or a specific platform, and it'll go ahead and filter those out for you. So if you're building something for Windows or for Azure, it'll only show you the projects that are available, cloud or desktop, etc. And then there's a whole list that goes on and on here. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this Azure ASP.NET Core app, and I say next, give it a name. I'll call it that, that's fine. Notice I can pick .NET 5, which is just built in now. I could go back to 3.1, but I would suggest 5. 5 is the future, which will dovetail nicely into 6. If I want to make Docker enable this and run it in a container, I can do that automatically. It will generate the file for me. And I'll just say, go ahead and create that. It's still it's going. We'll give that just a minute. This is Web App 101, but I think it's worth mentioning of how this gets built, how I can deploy it, what I can do to it while it's running. So there's the web app now. Of course, if I want to come back and let's say debug that, I can go to my top debug area and tell it to use, let's say, Microsoft Edge and hit debug. There's not much to show here, but I'll just show you what it looks like. I think it's running a little slow tonight. So when this runs, it really is just showing me that it's running. But what I want to do is add some API services. And the idea here is, hey, I'm a developer. I'm playing with something in Visual Studio. I want to, kind of cycle through and iterate over this. We call it the inner loop, right? I just want to make sure it works on my machine here. But getting into Azure is key, is my end goal here. Here's what it's actually running. So it's actually loading up here. So this won't be long. Again, this app doesn't do a whole lot. And in fact, it's just a web page. So I'm going to go ahead and kill it so we can move on here. Yeah, so it's just a welcome web page. I will show off one feature that's here that it won't show up on this particular technology, but if you're in debug mode, if you're running a Windows Form app, a WPF app, there's a feature called hot reload. I don't know if you can see that okay here. So if you're running something local, again, graphical, WPF, WinForm, there's a apply code changes. The idea here is I can make code changes to this live running app. It's called hot reload. It will automatically update the app without restarting the debugger, which is pretty awesome. If you haven't played with that. Hot reload. Let me go ahead and stop this. So I'm going to take that app now, and so that's just a web app. Of course, I'd build it up. What I want to do is add an additional some of the technology. So API management, I think, is a pretty cool technology. So I'm going to go ahead and add a .NET Core web API web app to this. We'll even call this API. Same thing, .NET 5. So you can see there's a weather controller that basically is the default for .NET Core. allows me to go in and do gets and writes and etc. One thing that's really nice while you're debugging this, again, you can deploy this, you can try it out locally, but if you're familiar with API management, it uses Swagger under the hood. But one thing I can do is I come up here to my debugger, and there's a new feature called HTTP Repl, REPL. It's this cross-platform command line utility tool that it's supported in .NET Core, but it allows you to test out your APIs from the command line. So let me just change it over to HTTP Repl and say debug. This should, air quote, should open up a command line tool to allow me to look at and test out my APIs from my obviously local here, which is nice. So you notice it starts a local host here. Must be a video that's screen sharing must slow this down. So what's the point of the Repl tool is allows me to look at my APIs as if they were folders on my hard drive, even though I'm a local host. So I can do things like do a directory and has nothing in it. I thought it did connect. Oh, you know what I didn't do? Let me try this again. I think what I need to do is stop this. Set this as my default. Startup project. We'll try it one more time. What you should see is in the command line, I should be able to do my gets and puts and whatnot from the command line itself. So now you see if I do a directory, it'll show me whatever gets are sitting there. There's only one, of course. I can actually change directory to that. So now it shows me my gets. I can say, just type in get. So it actually runs. So if I go back, I can actually get to the API itself and then issue the actual command. The status code comes back to 100, shows me whatever that API is. So it's a great way to just to test things locally. I know this is a really simple test, but it's integrated well with Visual Studio to test out things like this before I publish it. So I'm going to exit that. Next thing I want to do, of course, I want to show you some of the other built-in features here. So simple web apps, a simple API app. Simply stop this debugger. And if you'll notice, I can, from the right, basically right-click on the solution or project, and there's this create a Git Repo button. So this is a new thing built into the release of 16.10 for Visual Studio. It allows me to create a brand new Git repo here. Very, very easy. It's all built in. So I can do that if I wanted to. I could go to my Git Changes tab at the bottom here. Same thing. It's built in here as well. I go to Team Explorer. I can connect up to a Azure DevOps repo. I can connect up to a GitHub as well. So there's choices and integration pieces that are happening here that are worthy of mentioning. So they just make it way easier. We make it really easy to get code into Azure. Let me go ahead and minimize this. I have another Visual Studio instance here, this one. Same sort of app. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the other feature I like to talk about is monitoring the application. So looking for failures or exceptions, looking for performance, looking for bottlenecks, being able to debug something in production and whatnot, and monitor it. There's a feature in Azure Service called the Application Insights. And the way you can add that is I can right click and say, go to my web app, sorry. I can right click on the web app and where'd it go? I'm going to go back to this one real quick. I may have already added it, and that's why it's giving me a fit here. Usually from the right mouse click, you can just go ahead and say add. I think I already did this. You'll see it where it says configure application insights. So again, what I'm showing you is some of the integration points into Azure. And when I do that, it's going to basically ask me, hey, where do you want to put, where in Azure would you like to put this? If you're logged in with your IDE to your Azure account, if you have Visual Studio Pro or Enterprise, you have some free credits to use there. And allows you to either test it locally. Of course, I'll test it on the cloud itself. I would say next, and I'm going to actually show you what some of the things you can actually monitor here. It'll ask you for a subscription, and then it'll ask you for where do you want to put this, right? What resource group do you want to put this in? And say next, and so forth and so on. It'll go ahead and publish that. So I'm going to cancel out because it's already there. The other thing you can do here is once you get your application working and you've tested it locally is, hey, let's go ahead and deploy this. So I can right click and say publish. And with the right click publish, I can go ahead and say, there's a few ways to do this. I can actually say, I want to create a brand new like publish profile, if you will. Asks me where I want to put it. So I'm going to say Azure. Is it Azure, Windows, or Linux? If it's a container .NET Core, I can put it on Linux or Windows. It depends on what your account looks like. And then deploying it to a resource group. I already have a resource group built, so I'm just going to use that one. And then say finish. And that'll create this profile for me. And then I basically simply click publish. Now, what's cool that we've added since Build Conference is I can come to my API. So again, API management. And if I right click on the API and say publish this, same thing, target Azure. I'm going to specify Windows and specify the same thing here. Notice that on the left-hand side is the API management. So if you're using Azure's API management for for integration services, I can go ahead and tell it where to put it. And it'll show me the list of APIs that are already there. So there's the weather forecast. I can say finish. It will go ahead and publish that out as well. Let me actually go up here. We can actually go into the, so what you're looking at is the Azure Portal. I'm in this user group, this resource group called the Cleveland.NET group. If I go into the API service itself, right, I'll show you that there's nothing there. Shouldn't be anything there. This is that weather API I ran from the command line. So if I look at the weather forecast, it's there. You'll see there's no operations whatsoever. So now I'm going to go back to Visual Studio and tell it to go ahead and publish this. So when you click publish, you'll see at the bottom in the output window, it's going to publish the web app, and then it's going to publish the API. So this is a really great way to build API management up and actually publish them from Visual Studio without having to even create a pipeline. So we'll let that work for a minute. I want to show you a few different things inside of App Insights itself. And for that, yeah, so while that's publishing, I'm going to go back to, let me refresh this. I have a different app here because I have some metrics I gathered for application insights. So I wanted to show you what that looks like. So again, from Visual Studio, I can do things like, how is this app running? Again, as a developer, your head's down using Visual Studio. Maybe you don't want to run over to the portal and look at different things. So From here, I can go to the I can go here and look at, let's go to view. I'll just pull this up. I do want to show you another thing here. If you go to the view menu and then go to other windows, you'll see an application insights search box. Let me just pull that up. So once I've added application insights, I publish my app. I can collect metrics. I come up here and slice and dice this for, hey, show me the last 7 days. So this is just a .NET Core app with some APIs on it. And what it allows me to do is look at events that's happened over 7 days, whether they're trace events, whether they're custom events or exceptions, any dependencies I have, my availability, et cetera. I can search for things. So that alone's pretty, I think, pretty valuable. You'll see some information on the left-hand side, like where it's running, who's hitting it, how long they've been spending on it, et cetera. But what I can also do is search for specific things. So if I'm looking for like a unauthorized access to the app, I can just search for my 401s. So who's hitting this website that's not authorized to hit it? And this will go through my metric log. And the idea that I'm showing you is that I'm doing this through Visual Studio. So here's one that happened. If you double click it, of course, it'll pull it up, show me the properties, show me the source. I can scroll up and down, see when it was hit, where it was hit. Came from Western Europe here. Came from Amsterdam. So, so there's information that's pulled out of application insights for this app based on that. So if I wanted to, that's great. There's different things I can look for, exceptions or keywords. I do have some custom events in here. So this is a nutrition app. It's Mercury Health. So if I wanted to type in, let's say, banana, let's say I was looking for something that was inserting specific foods items, I could do that. Let's try this. And Visual Studio is communicating with Azure to pull this data back. So it just allows me to slice and dice this data. Slice and dice this data based on time. And I want to show you where this actually lives inside of Azure as well. So this is customized telemetry. Application Insights will collect a lot of information out of the box for you, but you can also add custom telemetry, which is what this is. So again, it shows me the time of day and whatnot. So let me get out of this. I'll just minimize this for a minute. The publish should have been done already. So you'll see back to the other window, this is Visual Studio. I published the web application 1. It published the web app and it also published the APIs at the bottom as well. So if I go back to this resource group now, not only can I run this app, if I go to the app service itself, this is the the world's probably most boring web app itself. But if I click on the website, it should have been published. Not sure why it's not. That's okay. We'll restart that site. I want to walk through what App Service does for you as well. We talked about it a little bit, but I want to talk more about it. The other thing I wanted to show you was the API management that got posted. So I'm going to go into API management service inside of Azure. Go back and show you the weather app itself, the weather API. Again, I have a simple Git weather API. Now you'll see that this is the API management piece. If you haven't seen this before, allows me to create this front end policies, inbound, outbound, back end policies, etc. It's a great way to host and put a place to put your APIs. I can go into settings. I can take care of the transformation of the API if I wanted to here. scale it up and down, etc. There's all kinds of things you can do here, but I can also test it from the portal, which is pretty cool. I can just say, hey, I want to test this weather API, very much like I did in the command line locally. I can go into the cloud and actually test it in the cloud itself. And there's my 200, and of course the payload came back as a JSON. So just a simple way to test it. This is not by any means the best way to test APIs, but this is a simple way to do it from the portal. The other thing I was going to show you is the app service itself. So let me go back to the resource group here. The Azure App Service I mentioned many times. If I go to the web app, so even though this web app doesn't seem to be cooperating with me tonight, we'll try it one last time. Nope. What I wanted to show you was this is a service itself. So one of the features you can do inside of the app service, remember I built this with Visual Studio. I deployed it by right-click publishing manually. The next thing, of course, you'd want to put this into some sort of CI/CD so multiple developers can work on something and it will just automatically deploy every time. There's notice on the app service itself. I should probably start. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start from the beginning here. My apologies for switching gears on you. In Azure, if you were to create an app service, I can go to the blade that says create a new resource. Everything in Azure is created this way. This is a very slow manual way to do it, but you can do it this way. So I can create virtual machines. I can create almost any resource here. So I would just type let's say I want to type a web app. We'll call it usually it shows right up right at the bottom here. There's a web app. That's what I was looking for. Create a web app. So remember in Visual Studio when I went to publish this, I can do two things here. I can say publish this, and I can say I want to create a brand new profile. I want to publish it to Azure. I want to go to Windows Service, and then it asks me where I want it. If I don't have an app service instant, I can hit the plus sign here in Visual Studio, and it will go ahead and create a new one for me. So this walks through what I'm about to show you in the portal. And the point of this is there's at least 3 or 4 ways to do the same thing every time. So this allows me to do it from Visual Studio, or I can come over back here and create it this way. Now you have to create a new resource group. I already have one. I call it Cleveland, so I'll just grab that one. And that's just a logical container for all my different resources. Give it a name. It has to be globally unique, and you'll see the little check mark, the green check mark on the right. I can pick whether I'm deploying code to it, or if I have a Docker container and I want to run a Docker container or build a Docker container, App Service is fantastic for running Docker containers. Also, I can tell it if I say code, then I can tell it what language I'm running. So if I want to do .NET 5, and then I can pick one of the data centers. Usually you put this closest to your customers. So I'll say East US, and then I can say I want to create a brand new plan. And then I can change the size. Now, the size, this size picker you're picking depends on if you're doing dev or QA or doing sort of production work or dev test work. So Microsoft does offer this free tier. Keep in mind, it only runs 60 minutes of compute per day, and it only gives you 1 gig of RAM. But for free, it does enough to test some things out. Usually for $9 a day here, you can get a couple extra things, and it'll show you some features here. I usually start with a B1. And notice I can scale things up manually. Part of the app service is the beauty of it is, and the power of it is to be able to scale up. So normally you have to go to your production tiers, the slowest one here. Now remember, these prices are based on my subscription. When you log in, you'll see different prices. What I wanted to show you was some of the features that are included here. So it's kind of a la carte a little bit. Shows me I have some deployment slots, daily backups. I can auto scale up to 10 instances. And then, of course, if I want that, I just say apply. And then I can review, and it'll go out and create a web app. So rather than create one from scratch, I already have one here, and you'll end up on this app service blade. So let's look at a couple things. Not only can I look at some information here, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to show you a one that's running. It was just here. Where'd it go? So on the blade of the app service, you'll have some basic metrics here as far as response time, requests, etc., coming in and out. On the left is where I can go ahead and do things like this. I can go to settings. So if I wanted to go to configuration settings for connection strings to databases or anything else you need a connection string for, I can put those in here. So this is one of the a good pattern to use is put your connection strings and items in here. I can set up authentication, so I can have my app require. I could have my app require that I get logged in ahead of time. I could go in hook up application insights, which of course was already done. And one of the things I wanted to show you was the scale up piece. So, hey, let's say you built your app, it's too slow. It's maybe you need a bigger machine for it. I come up here and just change it right here, scale it up. It's as simple as changing the machine and saying apply. And within a minute or so, I'll have a new machine. But another thing that you can do is a scale out. The idea here is I want to configure this to auto scale. So custom auto scale for sites that get a lot of traffic that fluctuates, I can say just set this to auto scale. I can come down here and say it's based on a metric, and I can add a rule. And the rule you see often is you'd see things like, hey, if the CPU hits 80% or 70%, scale out. So what you're going to see here is it's saying, hey, on average, when this metric hits 70% or it's greater than 70% for more than 10 minutes, and this is all configurable, I want you to increase the user count by 1. And then, of course, if it's under 5 minutes, under 70%, then I scale it back down. But this happens automatically for me, so I don't have to worry about thinking about it. So I can set that up on any app service plan, whether it's running a container or not. So it's really quite powerful, actually, to do it this way. If this was a little faster tonight, this will show you what the averages have been over time. Hey, Sam, I'm just doing a sound check. Are you still able to hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. My video has stopped. That's why I was asking.
Even the video is flowing smoothly as well.
Ah, okay. My screen just froze. That's okay. Thank you. So when I create this rule, you'll notice that, of course, this application doesn't get a lot of traffic at all, but you'll see that the average CPU is only 2.3%. So this app for me would never scale. It never hits any more than 70. And the point I'm telling you this is that you can actually pick a smaller app service plan, and you can run multiple websites on a single app service plan, and then just let autoscale take care of itself. So autoscale is pretty nice. I can come here and also go into, let's see, a couple other things here. If I wanted to throw an API in front of this, I can go to API management because it's all connected. I can go ahead and configure that if I wanted to. And it'll ask me which one. Of course, I can say the Cleveland one and the weather app, etc. I can pick that same API I just linked. A couple other things I wanted to show you was backups. So being able to back up your website automatically, right? I can say configure this. It'll ask me when. Do I want to back up the connection string? Yes, I do. Do I, how often do I want to back it up? I'd have to pick up storage. Of course, I have to have storage set up for it to back it up too, so that's what it's asking me. So I'll just get out of that right now. And once it's done, it'll automatically back things up. So that's a pretty nice thing. The other thing I mentioned was you may want to set up CI/CD pipeline. So how hard is that to do? It's actually pretty simple here. I can go into the deployment area, and there's a thing called the Deployment Center. In fact, let me do this on the Cleveland one. It's actually nicer. If I go to Deployment Center, so this is just built into App Service as well. It makes it really simple to set up this logging or set up this connection back to wherever your source code is, right? So pick over where your source code is. It could be in GitHub, could be Bitbucket, Azure DevOps repos. So if I say Azure DevOps repos, it'll ask me where, which organization's it in. And where is it? There it is. Ask me which project I want to put it in. Perhaps it's a Cleveland project or Mercury Health or wherever it happens to be, right? And then what repo you want it in, etc. So once you set that up, it will actually build the CI/CD pipeline to build the app and deploy it back to this app service. Pretty straightforward. And to show you when it's already there, if I go to Deployment Center here on the Mercury Health app, you'll see it shows me the deployments. And these are all deep links back into Azure DevOps repos, is where it's at. It shows me the build number, keeps track of everything when it was deployed last. So keep that in mind. I'll bring that up when I show you App Insights. Another thing I wanted to show you in Azure is if I go back to the home, I think this is a really cool feature too. For anyone out there that just wants to get started, kind of kick the tires and try something out, there's this thing called the Devops Starter. The product group keeps this up to date fairly well. And the DevOps Starter allows me to say, hey, I want to create an app. I want to create a CI/CD pipeline. I want everything created for me in a few minutes. So what you do is just go to the DevOps Starter and say create, and to pick the language of your choice. If you're playing around with Node or Java or Python, you pick your language. I'll say .NET. And then, of course, if I pick .NET, the next step depends on what, if you pick, let's say go back and pick Azure or something. Let's do that. If I pick Java, it'll ask me which framework I want. I'll say I want to use Spring Cloud. That's cool. Let's do that. What service do I want to run this on? So I want to run it in Kubernetes or containers or a web app, Linux. Let's say Linux. Say next. And then it has to authorize back to my GitHub repo. These pipelines, just be very clear, creates a GitHub Actions in the GitHub repo, not Azure DevOps. They changed that over. It used to be the other way around. And I'll say, so it's going to give me a web app name. And for that Java Spring Cloud app, I'll pick East US, which is Virginia. I'll say Java. And if everything looks good, here's the pricing tier. It's this 1 core, 3.5 gig of RAM. I can always go in additional settings. When I click that, it'll allow me to change it a little bit if I want. When it's all said and done, though, all I need to do is review it and create it. What it does is going to go out and, oh, it's complaining to me. That's okay. I'll show you when it's done. What it's going to do is build a sample Hello World application in the language of your choice, in the framework of your choice, and check it into source control in the repo of your choice into GitHub. It's going to build a complete build pipeline and the deployment pipeline, and then run it and then deploy it to Azure. The starter does all that for you. I'll show you when it's done. So it's a really great way to dissect and reverse engineer how it's actually built. If I show you the Mercury Health one, this is what it would look like once it's done. And these are all deep links as well. So it shows me my code, shows me last time things were checked in, and shows me deploying to different environments. So I have dev QA environments, I have load performance testing, labs, etc. Shows me the repo, shows me I can deep link into these things, shows me the actual website. So if I actually click that, it will pop open to the actual website itself. It sure should. And again, this is a .NET Core app, just for tracking nutrition and exercise information, but I jumped right to that from this page. Shows me the app service is healthy, it's running, and then it shows me my application insights for any failed responses or server requests, which we're going to go into and look at that. So what's cool is if you say, hey, I want to see how this pipeline work for the build pipeline, you'll see at the top, I could just jump into that. This will take me out. I happen to have this built on my Azure DevOps repos. Let me make sure this is big enough here. Oh, it is, good. So I can actually jump out to the pipeline that was used for this. If I wanted to see how it was built, I can actually go into the build pipeline. Now, this isn't a session on DevOps. We, happy to go into that deeper if you want to see more, but there's a DevOps pipeline here. I'll say just a build pipeline that builds the code. This is the CI system. So it builds it and runs it and analyzes it and runs security checks, etc. on this. So this is what it looks like. There's not really a lot to see here, but it just runs the steps. This is an Azure DevOps. And when it's done, it hands it off to the deployment pipeline, which will be, we call releases. And this release pipeline basically deploys the app service, deploys the APIs. I'll show you what one looks like. Not nearly is much, let me rephrase that, much simpler than the one that was Microsoft uses for the progressive exposure deployments. But the idea here is I can grab binary artifacts from wherever they happen to be, run it out to dev. Then I sit here and go through some sort of a post-approval process and maybe some UI testing using Selenium or something in my QA area, load and performance testing, and then deploying it out to production. With that, I can actually go check, hey, why didn't it deploy? There were some gates that had to go, it had to jump through some hoops here, which seemed like they worked, but I think the approver declined it, which is what was rejected by the release management. So these are the build release system that came from this area that was built for me by this starter kit. So just check that out if you get a chance. It's a pretty cool feature, I think. The other thing I was going to talk about was if I go into this and actually edit this, what you'll see is these tasks. I'm actually not in the, I'm in the wrong area, sorry. I did it again. What I wanted to show you was the traditional, in DevOps, there's a traditional classic, they call it the classic editor. The classic editor allows me to look at task-related items like this. Each task on the left is a task runner. Each task has parameters on the right I can fill in. And this is what we call classic editor. Now, this is fine and dandy. It's worked for years. It's not the recommended approach. It's also not the future of pipelines that I see with customers as well. The trending way to do is using Yaml pipelines. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's a button that says View YAML. So right now, Microsoft's in this kind of in between supporting Classic and YAML, and there's a way to actually help. We give you some helpers with that. And of course, you hit the plus sign. There's all these marketplace items to deploy different tasks, almost anywhere you want to deploy. So keep that in mind. With that, of course, as the deployment pipeline, the build pipeline works very similar, but I wanted to show you what an actual YAML pipeline would be. If I were to say, hey, I want a brand new pipeline, so in DevOps, this is what I would recommend doing. Do a brand new pipeline, ask where your source code is. The YAML editor here will analyze the source code and come up with the best possible solution based on the technology. So if it's a Node.js app or Java app or .NET Core app, it will try to figure that out for you. So if I just say Azure Repos, and it'll actually select a repo. It will ask me, hey, this is what I see. What do you want? I guess it's actually going to allow me to get a template. You can also pick empty templates if you like. This is a .NET Core app. And it throws it into the YAML editor. Now, the one thing I want to talk about is, so this isn't about YAML either. There's a lot of tutorials out there on YAML, but the YAML code that I'm building right now is version controlled. Now it's checked into my source control system. So as I make edits on it, or as the team members makes edits on it, I can go ahead and track and trace those different edits. We give you this idea of a show assistant. So for instance, if I wanted to look at this build setting, I can click on the YAML code on the left. It will show me what it looks like in the old classic text editor. So I can go ahead and fill out these things, these parameters here. Okay. So I call it a little bit of a cheat, but that's okay. Same thing if I wanted, let's say if I wanted to go and put, do something with PowerShell, I would come over to the task editor on the right-hand side, type in PowerShell, Azure PowerShell perhaps, give it some information about maybe my subscription, whatever, script path, etc. Maybe it's inline script and give it some code and then click add. And you'll see on the left, it puts the task in for you. So I don't have to worry about wondering all the different parameters that go with the YAML syntax for a specific task. I can just go here and use the editor or the visualizer, if you call it. Okay, so keep that in mind if you're playing around with YAML. It's something worth mentioning. And in the end, you'll get a pipeline that could look like this. Remember YAML too, using YAML allows you to do the build, any kind of security checks, code analysis checks, and the deployment checks. And it's one file. Again, it's version controlled. I can always go back in time and just like any code changes. So again, this is the way of the future. If you haven't used YAML, it's something worth the time to get into. I'll show you what one looks like. This also has the approval process, etc. as well. So I mentioned building the app. You'll see the building the app is the first step. This is a YAML pipeline output. I can go in and look at all the different log files. I deploy my infrastructure as code we talked about. Now I'm playing around with Bicep. Bicep is a abstraction layer on top of ARM templates, the Azure Resource Manager templates. Once that's done and successful, of course, I deploy the database, I deploy connection strings, I deploy the web app itself, different functions. I run Selenium and Playwright test, UI testing. I can dump it out to DevTest Labs, and then I wait QA. If this is where the manual process or approval comes in. If somebody approves it, then I deploy it out to production. So, but anyway, this is just a simple pipeline to show you how that works. I thought I saw a question in here. Matt asked, DevOps load testing did discontinue on April 29th this year. So yes, it is discontinued. The recommended replacement, Matt, was to use JMeter. And Microsoft at that point in time got out of the load testing business. Visual Studio 2019 was the last version you'll see load testing in. So that said, I'll put a period there. That said, there is a private preview right now of cloud-based load testing that Microsoft is bringing back. So if that's something you're interested in, knowing more about, Matt, I would suggest just email me. I'm happy to help you or point you in the right direction for that if you're looking at performance load testing. It is coming back. It's in private preview at the moment, but it is something that's going to be running in Azure. Okay, so keep that in mind. Again, email me. I'll put my email address up at the end here. Yeah, you're welcome. And one more thing, Matt, since you talked about that, if you look at the blade on the left, test plan blade, we still have the load tests. This technically shouldn't be here anymore. The load test button is still there. Oh, right there. It did shut down and he actually took it off the menu, which is about time, right? Okay, so I don't have to lie. It's not here anymore. So it's gone, but you will see something else come out in that. So just stay tuned. All right, I wanted to show you the CI/CD pipelines, YAML pipelines. If you're interested in looking at like what does the infrastructure code look like, I'll just give you a short example of this. I think this is worthy of mentioning as well. If nothing else, this is a sprinkling of information tonight, right? ARM templates are the way. ARM templates are a structure I can build. So let me actually make this easier. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. I'm going to go into, get rid of this screen. ARM templates are basically a template for the infrastructure that the app runs on, whether it's a database, key vault, connection strings, whatever it happens to be, whatever infrastructure it runs on, it doesn't even matter. There's a way you'd want to build an ARM template if you're deploying to Azure. There's other tools out there, but Azure ARM is by far the best one to use. It's also complicated to read. It makes it quite difficult. Let me show you one. Hopefully this will just pop up here. Give that a minute. So ARM template is JSON formatted. It allows you can pull in values and parameters, and then the resources themselves go out and get created. And this template engine runs and deploys all this code. If these resources don't exist, they'll be created. This is fantastic to take this and standing up dev and QA and staging areas because it's the same infrastructure. The idempotent piece of this is if the resource exists already, it will go ahead and make sure that it's according to what it's supposed to look like, and it'll put it back the way it was. What I wanted to show you on the left-hand side is the editor. So if I'm in Visual Studio creating an ARM template, we make it a little easier for you. So I can take this ARM template and do things like, hey, I want to add an additional resource to it. Maybe I want to add a SQL database or something. So I can come down here and say, hey, I want to add a SQL database and give it a name. Right, and pick a server and do whatever, create a brand new server, and so forth and so on. And it will create the template to create the server. It's just putting the template, it's just basically breaking it down. So the next thing I would do, and I'll show you that fast here as well. Once you have the template, you'll see if I go to my source control system and look in the repos, I have an ARM template here. And if I go into, I'll just pick the web app one, here we go. Again, this template's in source control. I can version control it. I can make changes to it, but this is a simple app, but it's real easy to get tangled up in this. ARM templates grow really fast. I mean, really big, really fast. So that said, let me finish the story here. When I deploy in the pipeline, I want to show you what it looks like to deploy an ARM template. If I go to the editor and show you what this looks like, the first step would be to deploy the actual template itself, and that would be right here. Nope. Right here. So this is an Azure deployment. Pick your subscription, pick your resource group, pick your data center, and this is it right here. As I go to source control and I pull out the JSON template, it's that simple. It picks it up. What's cool is I can use the same template and I can override parameters. So I can create different plans and different settings, etc. by just changing. I don't have to change the template. I just change the pipeline of the parameters. Something that's extremely important is this deployment mode. ARM templates have this concept of deployment modes. Incremental is that idempotent, meaning that, hey, if that plan's up there, let's say that plan's up there and it's an S2, what this will do when it runs is put it back to an S1. Or if it's in East US, it'll put it back to where it was supposed to be. Incremental will do that for me, which is awesome. Complete will blow away the resource group and start over. So if you were not careful, you could delete everything. Sort of scary. So keep that in mind. So that's how you deploy an ARM template, which stands up, again, the infrastructure, and then I go ahead and I can deploy all my other resources, which is great. So that said, also keep in mind that if you're using Visual Studio Code, I'm kind of switching gears on you guys right now. Visual Studio Code has great extensions and plugins. If you go to Visual Studio Code extensions and you look up ARM, there's great tooling for the ARM template. Allows you to create and maintain ARM templates inside of Visual Studio Code a little easier, right? Gives you some cheats, gives you some telesense, etc. So that's cool. So keep that in mind. The next revolution of ARM templates are what we call Bicep. If you haven't heard of Bicep, it's something you can check out as well. There's a great where's it at? Hey, what happened to that window? If I go to, there's a getting started in Bicep someplace here. Yeah, right here, Bicep. Go to Azure. It's a GitHub. It's all open source. And Bicep is this project that sits. It's basically it's a domain-specific language that sits on top of JSON. Keep in mind, you compile a bicep file, it turns into JSON, but you don't have to type it. You don't have to make it, create it. So let me show you what that looks like. Oh, and by the way, you want to install your bicep extension inside of Visual Studio Code as well. So bicep is a whole leaps and bounds better than writing JSON templates and ARM templates from scratch. So strongly recommend, this is the Microsoft future and direction, of course, use bicep. And what that looks like, let me just show you one.
A quick question, Randy.
Yeah.
Is bicep to JSON the same as TypeScript to JavaScript?
I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I think it does the same concept, that abstraction layer that compiles down to JavaScript. I think it's close. I don't know. I don't want to say it's exactly the same.
So the end result is JSON basically in bicep.
Bicep would be like TypeScript. If bicep is TypeScript, then JavaScript would be the ARM template, if that's what we're saying.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. I've recently started playing with this, so just keep in mind, what's cool here is this is a bicep file, and its extension is bicep. And once you're coding it, of course, I can put in values. Each of these values are addressable by another. I can also look at, like, if I wanted to use like different SKUs or different data centers, they would pop up because it's IntelliSense. Bicep taps into the Azure APIs to pull down its values as you're typing them. So if I wanted to add a new resource here, I don't know what, let me just make it up as I go here. If I said resource, I'm going to call it the Cleveland SIG demo, and I wanted to say it's a Microsoft something. As I type, the IntelliSense will kick in, goes out to App Insight, or goes out to Azure and says, hey, what am I trying to type here? Maybe I'm creating a new App Insights or a web app or a Visual Studio account or an ADED. All the APIs are available to me. So once you get to use it, there's a tutorial that will walk you through this, but once you get used to it, it's a pretty awesome so far. So far, so good. Once you have the template here, I can go down into the Visual Studio Code here, and basically you build it. It's just bicep.exe.build, and there's a tells you how to install these tools. Once you build it, then I can just take that template. It's a JSON template, and I guess I should show you that. Over here, it just built that template. If I actually get rid of this template, let me just go ahead and delete it. What's cool is I don't have to ever mess around with a JSON template again. And so now if I go ahead and build it, you'll see it will show up on the left-hand side here. So it just showed up there. So yes, I can go look at it, but I never have to touch it. If I need to make a change, I'll make it in the bicep file and recompile. And of course, the bicep file is version controlled, which is awesome. So then when I'm ready to deploy it, I just say, hey, deploy it. It will go out and say, I see you have some parameters here, because you can pass some parameters to a JSON file, like, hey, what's your SQL administrator login for SQL Server? So I could just say, I don't know, Azure admin. What's the password for that? What's the identity name, whatever. This is how I can manually iterate over testing a bicep file, compile it into JSON, and then deploy it to Azure. And at some point, my resources will just show up, right? Now, the next step, of course, is moving that into a pipeline. Remember I showed you how to deploy a pipeline, right? A JSON file. It's just an ARM template resource in the pipeline that says deploy this. That's all it is. But what's really cool is I can skip that part. Yeah, I apologize why this is so slow. What's cool, let me just go back here real quick. So if I go to my repos, in the files themselves, you'll see I have a infrastructure as code repo. I have bicep files here. So you store these just in the source control like everything else. They're the same exact ones. So this is what I was showing you in Visual Studio Code. It's just this isn't as pretty, so I wanted to use Visual Studio Code, plus I have the extensions. And then I can pass in parameters just like any other JSON file. And of course, the pipeline itself, what I wanted to show you was if I edit this pipeline where I was deploying the template, because this is built into the Azure command line, because it knows how to deploy ARM templates. Back in the day here, you had to deploy right here your JSON template. What I can do now is I can just point it to the bicep template like that. What this deployment task will do is compile the bicep for me, generate the JSON in a working directory, and then execute the JSON against Azure. So I never have to even touch a JSON file again. So that's the beauty of bicep as well. I don't have it all wired up right now to show you this in this area, but this is how it'll work. All right. So I know we're getting close to the bottom of the hour here. I wanted to wrap this up by showing you one last thing that I talked about a couple times is if I go back to my, I wanted to talk about application insights. I think it's a pretty cool service. I think it's worth ending on. So if I go to, this is the web app, the .NET Core app I talked about, and I was using a 3-day window here. So application insights, again, I can add it through Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code and deploy it. It's not expensive. It's just collects data. It's a moving window of data. So I can collect things like, hey, is this application running very well? If you're a Visual Studio user, I can integrate this with my snapshot debugging and performance monitoring from Visual Studio. But here I can look at, hey, for 3 days worth, I have these server requests. I can see my response time, 19 seconds, probably not great. I can see my availability is at 94%. Well, that's not so bad, but I get a lot of failures, right? But not so bad lately. So this is just a dashboard, but on the left-hand side, I can do things like show me the application map. It's one of my favorite things. Show me the flow of requests into my application for the last 3 days. And that includes API call, function calls, you name it, database calls, configuration calls, key vault calls, anything to do with your resources. And I can do things like, well, first of all, I would probably go like this and say, oh, the red doesn't look so good. I can click on my API calls. I see 2% of the time they're failing. I can see how long the latency is in between calling my database backend. I have a database, I have a call out to an existing or a public-facing API called CatFact Ninja. I see it fails at 1.1% of the time, but 1.4 thousand calls. So the point here is I would start where the red is. I can click on this instance and it'll expand the blade a little bit and show me that the 2% of the time is happening on my exercise APIs, my New York movie vault looking up the Hobbit, and of course API exercises here. So it allows me to investigate those failures here. I can also at the same time look at my best performing, or I should say it this way, my slowest requests. So I can investigate that here as well from the map. So keep that in mind. The other thing on the left-hand side is I'll show you a few more things. Live metrics I think is pretty cool. Our DevOps team has a monitor in their team room that monitors the results from the DevOps itself, the worldwide DevOps usage. So what this is showing me is real-time information in and out of this Mercury Health app. It also shows me the number of servers at the bottom that it's running across. So keep in mind this app is made up of Azure Functions, which is a server behind the scene. I have an app service, I have an API service. This just shows me all the different servers and their loads, which is pretty cool. It also is showing me trace files that are happening, dependency calls, any failures that might be happening in real time. And you'll see those pop up here. So this is just called live metrics. You might have to watch it a while, but it does pretty cool. Transaction search, remember when I was in Visual Studio and I searched for 401s? This is the same thing inside of the portal. So same exact data inside of Visual Studio as you can look at it here. What's nice too is I can group this by results, so I can actually show me the grouping of the most common errors or issues I have. So I thought that was pretty cool. Availability. Who wouldn't want to know how available your app is? And again, everything in App Insights is this time window. So if I look at the last 3 days, I want to show you something. I need to go 7 days. Oh, I'm sorry. I think 3 days showed it to me. I just saw it. Give that a minute here. This is showing me the availability, and think of this as ping tests. Does this app have a heartbeat? Does the API have a heartbeat? Does the function have a heartbeat? These are the heartbeats I can actually go check, and I can say, hey, I'm looking at nutrition. I can see what data centers I'm pinging. If I want to edit this, again, these are simple URL tests or simple API tests. You basically give it a URL, you pick a data center, and Azure will take care of the rest. And tell it to run it every 5, 10, 15 minutes. So now I know if this thing has a heartbeat, which my tests are coming back pretty good, which is great, right? I can also do a scatter plot, so I can look at availability times and whatnot. This is a very happy path. Everything's working just fine. But if you notice, I can actually hover over these buttons, these dots. Last thing, or the other thing is performance. So how well is this app performing? As a developer, you want to know these things. This App Insights is really geared towards development teams and developers. I can say, hey, what are the operations and how long do they take? How many times have they happened? And how long does it take to do them? I can grab these little bars at the bottom here and say I see a spike. I can zoom in to time. So I can say 9 a.m. maybe to, oops, grab this, maybe to here. Now I can zoom into my metrics here, actually 20 milliseconds. I want to point out something. This is something we've recently updated in the last, I say, a month or two. It's called the markers. We insert markers when you deploy, whether you're deploying through CI/CD, through GitHub, through DevOps. However you deploy, is you'll put these markers into the top here. You see them at the very top, these markers. That's the last time I deployed. So if there's a spike, you can see there's a spike as soon as I deployed downward. I can click on the deployment and show me where it came from. It came out of deployment, what day it came on, what Git Repo it was from, and of course a deep link back into that exact deployment. So at any point in time, I can look at this chart and say, huh, that thing took a hit or whatnot. So you'll also see here at the bottom is the duration, the delta, whether it's getting better or worse on my deployments. So very, very small nutshell here, looking at App Insights on performance. Dependencies, right? So my app is dependent upon API calls, it's dependent on SQL calls. You'll see the SQL calls here. So same sort of thing. If there's anything in this chart I want to go look at, I can just start drilling in and poking around and looking at, like the SQL itself. I can click on samples. I can look at, let's say, the suggested sample here, and then Application Insights will go ahead and give me this end-to-end transaction on, hey, where did that SQL call come from? It'll go and show me that. It shows me the connection string, how long it took. This is not a really good example, but that's the idea. So let me go back. Let me close that. So that's about performance. What I want to show you too is failures, right? If the app fails, we want to know about it. We want to know about it before customers know about it. So it's a similar sort of GUI UI here that I can actually drill into, and I can see my markers again. I can also see, hey, this is 24 hours. Let me go 3 days here. You'll see the response code is on the right-hand side. So here's the 404. So if I want to see why am I getting 12 404s, right? That's probably not good. So I can click on the 12, drill into that. I can see on the left and the center, the calls are how many times they're failing. So this update exercise record API has failed more than any other, call. I probably should start there, is what I would probably do. Oh, I didn't want that one. Nope, I didn't want that one. Hold on. I wanted, this end-to-end transaction will show me like your user clicked here, clicked there, they did this, they did that, and this tracks this whole thing right down to the failure. So when you do get a failure, I can actually drill into it. And if this was a code failure, I could actually drill into the line of code that was failing, which is pretty slick. I don't happen to have any of those. Let me see if there's an exercise record one here. I didn't even know about this failure, actually. This is new. This is new to me, but every time I demo this, I can see new failures. Not good, but it is what it is. So I can see my API calls, and then I can see there's this JSON reader that's failing. And you'll see the call stack here at the bottom on the right. And then, of course, it's including the framework calls. So I can just click the button that says just my code, and I can see that at line 94, there's some problem with this parsing, JSON parser that I have to go look at. Again, I've not seen this here before, so this gives me something to do tomorrow. But yeah, so I easily found there's a problem. Maybe your framework swallows it. Well, it doesn't. It won't get swallowed with App Insights. It shows up here. So again, think of App Insights for the application map itself, availability, does it have a heartbeat, the performance, the failures, any exceptions it has. I can create alerts to alert me when something happens that I might not even know about. I can go to my snapshot debugger and actually look at what happened in production and pull that down into Visual Studio and start analyzing it. There's also this whole area called usage. So who's the users that are using the app itself? So think of this as a little bit of a mixture of, let me get a mixture of usage as well as, there's not very many users on this app, so I apologize there. But from an app dev standpoint as well as a usage standpoint. So I can look at the users, the sessions, how long they used them for. I can see what information like operating system or browser they're coming from and what country they're coming from, these hits, etc. Sessions, events, user flows are pretty cool, right? The flow through the application itself, this will track. So if you say, hey, I want to start at my, I don't know, home page. And I go 7 days, create the graph. It will go ahead and show me a very boring graph that says user clicked here and then clicked there and then clicked here. Now this app doesn't get more than a couple of users, so there's not a lot of, it doesn't look really that great, but I know hopefully I just gave you a brief insight to what Application Insights does. So think of it really, it's just a reporting mechanism for creating, tracking an application and all of its components, not just the app itself. And then we can go look at the data itself. Excuse me, sorry. You'll see costs aren't really that high. I think it's paid $6 for data ingestion. I know I think Matt was talking about load testing. So I created some multi-step tests. So if you record, let's say, a Selenium test or a Playwright test that you want to actually test the usage of the app to make sure it's functioning correctly, what's cool is you can put that into a function, and then I can call that function from availability test. So I'm only pinging a URL, and that URL happens to execute a test that's what this is. That's what these Playwright navigation tests are. They can actually go out and navigate the app in a headless browser to see if it's functioning correctly and then report back. And I won't get data collected with that. So anyway, I think that's it. I want to make sure, I want to respect everybody's time tonight. I know we're getting close to the bottom of the hour. I want to hand this back to Sam, and I also want to thank everyone for hanging out with me tonight. And hopefully I showed you a few things you might not have seen before. Any questions or whatnot? Again, I'll get Sam these slides. You'll have the video. You know how to reach me if you do have questions on anything you saw or need more information. I'm happy to help. So again, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you, Randy. Highly appreciate it. Just wanted
You're welcome.
to go through a couple wrap-up announcements before we wrap it up for tonight. Let me share my screen. All right. So as far as resources go, I posted the link for the YouTube as well as the eval form in the chat. So feel free to take a look at that. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to get updates on when the video is uploaded after it's being edited. Also, regarding any tech events that we'll go through in just a second, those are also posted on my YouTube channel. They're posted on my blog, and the link is posted there. And in addition, the feedback evaluation, the link is also in the chat for that as well. As far as events, virtual user group meetings, since we're still virtual for the most part, us and other user groups, I wanted to share with you some of the upcoming meetings that are happening. Tomorrow, Friday, June 25th, is the OWASP Cleveland chapter. They're going to be meeting, and you can find the meeting information on meetup.com. And then following in the regular scheme of things with the first Tuesday of every month is July 6th with the Ohio North database training, and they're going to be meeting over online as well. On July 15th is the GLUGNet, or the Great Lakes User Group, and you can find their meeting information on Meetup, and they're going to be meeting the third Thursday of every month. Those meetings are also recorded and posted on my YouTube channel as well. And last but not least, the Hudson Software Craftsmanship Group, they're going to be meeting on the third Wednesday of July, which is July 21st. And then on July 22nd, which is the fourth Thursday, is the July meeting of our group again, the Cleveland C# VB.NET User Group. And there we're going to have some folks from Microsoft discussing how to contribute to the Microsoft documentation. As far as virtual conferences, tomorrow, there's a global Azure Data and AI Fest that's going to be happening. That's a free event, 4 sessions all day that will be covering a variety of topics related to Azure and AI. On July 30th is Cincy Deliver. And for those of you not familiar with Cincy Deliver, that's happening in Cincinnati, and it's basically 2 events combined into one. You have Cincy Agile, and then you have Cincy Deliver, which talks more about development and .NET development-oriented tasks. So you can find the information on cincydeliver.org. And August 18th through the 20th is Codepalooza. That's also going to be happening virtually. Let me backtrack for a second. Cincy Deliver will be happening in person. Codepalooza will be happening virtually. And that's going to be August 18th through the 20th. And you can find the information for that on codepalooza.com. Lastly, I always like to discuss job openings. So I know Tech Systems, I'm not sure if someone is representing the Tech Systems staff or not, but I know they always have job openings available at techsystems.com/IT-jobs. And also I'd like to throw it out there, who's hiring currently? Feel free to either speak up or enter it into chat. And no willing volunteers. And if anyone is looking, feel free to either send me an email and I will connect you with someone from Tech Systems or someone else that may be hiring. Lastly, if any questions that come up after the meeting, you need to get in touch with me. You can find me at snasser@nistechnologies.com via email or on Twitter @SamNasser. And then my blog where I post technical events as well as the PowerPoint slide for tonight's presentation, that will be posted on my blog. And if you subscribe, again, you'll be getting notifications immediately. And last but not least, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. So with that, if there's no questions or comments, I thank you all for attending and look forward to seeing you at the July meeting.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Randy.
Take care. Have a good night.
Good night.